And I'm going to do the badging for the 3D printer. The 3D printer I'm going to show you is the MakerBot Replicator 2. And the way I want you to think about this process is in 3 stages. First, you've got to create a model. The second part is to then slice that model. This is a process where you are computing the various paths that the printer is going to have to follow in order to print out that object. And then last, you've got to deal with the printer and all of its requirements in order to make sure your object physically comes out of it. So let's start with the downloading or creating your object. If you are creating an object, I would recommend Tinkercad. It has great tutorials, and it's something that you can use to actually design an object of your own creation online in your browser for free. I'm going to download something from Thingiverse. Thingiverse is a repository of objects. I've already loaded up this object, which you could see are carabiners. There's some preview images as well as comments and instructions on how to print. And then if I go to Thing Files, I can access the STL. That's a standard format for 3-dimensional shapes. So I've downloaded it, and I've opened it in a program. This is a free program you can get from MakerBot. It's called MakerBot Desktop. And in the MakerBot Desktop, you basically arrange where your object's going to go inside the platform, and it's going to do the job of slicing, setting up all of the coordinates which the head of the printer will follow when printing the object. So you can add by clicking Add or dragging the file in. Then you're going to want to make sure that you've got it printing to the right device. So under Devices, you can see that we have Replicator 2. We have 2 Replicator 2s, and then we have actually one dual-headed one, which you can use the Replicator 2X setting for. So I'm going to continue with the Replicator 2. You can select the object and manipulate it using these tools on the side. But we're going to go right into Settings, and we're going to choose how we want to print this. The biggest choices you have here are the quality standard, which basically tells you how far it steps up on the z-axis. So a low quality object is going to have a layer height each time it steps up of 0.3 millimeters. High is going to be 0.1. I'd recommend that you print most things you're going to do on standard, which seems to work very well. Then you have 2 choices, rafts and supports. I pretty much always choose rafts because rafts create a little support system underneath it. This helps to compensate for any unlevelness. It also allows the object to bind plastic to plastic, which means that it's more likely to print well. It's also not very difficult to remove. Supports are another story. Supports are little scaffolding that build up underneath in order that any overhang is supported when it goes to print. So for example, if you were to print a statue of me with an arm hanging over, when it got to my fist, it wouldn't have anything to print on, so that plastic would pour onto the floor. Supports would create a scaffolding that goes up, but then you'd have to cut that away and sand down the hand and make sure that you had a nice smooth object at the end. So I avoid using supports whenever possible. You can definitely get a 45-degree angle out without supports, and you can do small amounts of overhang. So try thinking about how to orient your object so that you can avoid using supports. The other ones are infill. That's the amount of honeycombing. So it creates, to save plastic and time, creates a little honeycomb on the inside to give it some structure. And 20% is a great default. And then shells. That's the, you can think of shell or skin. That's the layering on the outside that it provides in order to contain the insides. You're going to print with PLA most of the time. That's the default. Make sure to check your spool that it is in fact PLA. ABS is the other option, but you need to use a printer with a heated pad like the other one that we have here. So I'm going to say OK, and then export, and it's going to then prepare the object. It will also include an estimate of the time, an estimate of the plastic, and a preview that we can see live. So I'm going to click Preview. You can see that it's built actually a little platform. This is our raft underneath it, and I can scale through time to see how it's going to build. So it's first going to build this raft. Then you can see the honeycombing on the inside. Maybe you can zoom in a little bit on this preview. And it's going to build our object in about 45 minutes. If I'm happy with that, I would say OK, export, and then I would use an SD card to load the program on the SD card. It has to be a 2 GB or less SD card for the MakerBots to understand it. We've got 2 GB cards sitting in the MakerBot. So we've now done the software side of things. Time to fire up the MakerBot. Switch is on the back. You can then load the card inside of it. And to print, we'd simply go build from SD. We hit this to confirm. We would select the file we want, and we'd say OK. It would then go through the process of setting up to print. The first stage of that is actually warming up. Now, you might also want to load a different type of plastic. You can see on the back here, the plastic's loaded from a spool, and that spool needs to be tightly woven. It also needs to have no crossover. You can see here that if it gets all crossed over and loose, you're going to have problems as you go to draw the plastic out. So just as far as avoiding failures in prints,